Greetings, my dear brothers and sisters. Am I on? Am I? Okay. Greetings, my dear brothers and sisters. That term, brothers and sisters, is very significant. That word that's used in this passage is used 14 times in this epistle. That's significant. With that in mind, I want to start in a little different sort of way before I speak. I would like all of you to stand. And I'm going to give you a little task, only about a minute to do this in. But what I would like you to do is to make a point of turning and moving, if necessary, and greet a brother and greet a sister. Begin.
You good?
Thank you for the prayer. I've been baptized. I didn't know the cap was off. It's not immersion, though, so don't worry. Some people would say I'm all wet, but now you can say it. So why did I do that? When we think about this journey of being steadfast, we do it best in community. As a matter of fact, when we're in isolation, it's very difficult to do. When we're in isolation, we're dangerous. We're in danger. And I wanted you to feel the fact that you are with brothers and sisters in this room right now. The other reason I share this is because the nature of God, as depicted in the Trinity, is that He is relational. And in creation, He created us, both male and female, to reflect that image of Him by being relational. So my reason for doing that is to let you know, brothers, that you need sisters. And sisters, you need brothers. That's the way it works. There's also a little more superficial reason why I did this. Later on today, my wife is probably going to ask me, well, how did the message go? And now I can honestly say that people were moved. And got wet. Wisdom is the sound application of the knowledge of God and His will. Remaining steadfast in our pursuit of wisdom is very necessary, at times difficult, but not impossible, especially when in community. Continuing on this theme of James about wisdom, which was introduced 2 weeks ago by Jenna, it was apparent that wisdom awaits those who faithfully ask our generous God for it. The verses just read adds further guidance as we pursue wise living. I find it challenging that I will be the only one in the next 20 minutes speaking here about a text that starts with 2 commands: to be slow to speak and quick to listen. At the surface, it seems to me that what I would do best is just to stop and listen to all of you. The counselor in me tells me that if I'm going to help somebody, I need to hear them. I need to hear their story. So, you hear the dilemma in my mind? stay true to the text? Am I supposed to just be quiet and just allow you to talk and I'm to listen? I don't think so. Because on the other hand, I have known since August 16th, nearly 7 months ago, that I had the opportunity to speak on these verses, which provided me the opportunity to listen to these verses on a regular basis. And this is what I heard, and this is what I want to speak to you. And my hope is that my words reflect the text in a way that can encourage you in your pursuit of wisdom. I can sum up what I heard in a very simple statement, and that is that the Christian pursuit of wisdom involves a distinctive pace and process. Regarding pace in our pursuit of wisdom, there's this binary or spectrum James presents here about being quick and slow in our communication. James is telling us that to understand when slow and quick are in balance, wise responses will follow. Put it in another way, when is being quick wise and when is being slow wise? This involves pace. When should we speed up? When should we be slowing down? Regarding that question, let's take note of what the text says in the sequence of 3 commands. First, be quick to listen, to pay full attention. So we live in a culture where speed of response is highly valued and rewarded. The motto of this world is faster is better. You believe that? You live with that, don't you? Granted, if any of us are in danger, speed to act quickly is a virtue. But in the wisdom of how to best respond in a culture of doubt and disbelief, which we're in, James is suggesting that we best start with being quick to listen. This is something that our culture and our human nature is very slow, if not resistant, to do. James is telling us to make every effort to prioritize giving full attention to all around us. Now, the finiteness of human nature tends to be fixed on what is first seen, and especially if that stirs in an emotional reaction. I believe what James is implying by being quick to listen is to not be impressed and reactionary with what is first seen and felt. The kind of listening James is referring to allows us to slowly spend time and really get to know what is before us and trust that beyond our first impressions often lies a deeper and more valuable meaning. That meaning gives us the opportunity to see and understand what our finite and wise God reveals. His voice is the most worthy to listen to. Our first impressions and reactions can be the noise that distracts us from fully hearing his voice. This imperative to be quick to listen is also implying that we would be wiser to also pay more attention to what we may first deem as mundane or insignificant, the least of these, and be prepared to find the profound in those encounters. Whether events, phenomena, or the interactions with others, our God, our Creator, speaks and reveals his truth and will in and through what he has created, which
which includes our brothers and sisters, does it not? But if we are not fully paying attention because of being fascinated and seduced by our fast-paced initial and personal reactions of what we first see and our desire, I'm sorry, I lost my place here. Be seduced by our fast-paced initial and personal reactions to what is first seen, and we desire to be seen, heard, and obeyed, self-centered narcissism. If we give in to that, we will miss much of what is essential. Unless we are quick to listen, listening affords the opportunity to find more apt and wise responses. As a counselor, I have found that some of the simplest and almost micro expressions of people that I've listened to will lead to a needed and deeper process of growth. Truly listening and paying full attention also allows us to manage our initial reactivity. In doing so, we will be better equipped to see what is really going on and how to best respond to it. Which leads us to the second imperative regarding pace. Be slow to speak. James is telling us to take time to speak. When we slow down our sudden urge to speak what really needs to be said just at the right time, not too soon, not too late, has a much greater chance of being heard. Once again, I know that this is counter to our current culture and our fallen nature, but it is needed. Current culture is filled with examples of people saying, texting, posting, tweeting in an instant. When one indulges this urge to be quick to speak, at least half of the audience will either immediately disagree, wonder why it was even said, or react and judge with their urge to immediately respond and speak. Speed of expressing reactions has the nasty habit of annihilating and at least diminishing meaningful dialogue and wisdom. Why are we so hasty to speak? I have two thoughts for you on that. Our tendency to speak too quickly originates from our fallen nature. Our self-centered nature profoundly interferes with effectively communicating the message of the gospel we are entrusted with. All too often, we tend to love being heard and perceived as right more than loving those we are speaking to. Being slow to speak insists that our apologetic must be evangelistic, where we care for those who we are speaking with. Our listeners need to experience the gospel of God, of Christ, that God loves us, loves them, so much to redeem them from being his enemy, to making them his children, lavished in his love. How does our speech reflect that? How do our hearers really experience that in the interchanges? I leave you to ponder that question when you're talking about our faith. This is what gives us the status, after all, of being dear brothers and sisters. Anything other than that motivation to love our hearers before we speak. Any other kind of motivation to love them when sharing the gospel will not only, if we don't do that, what we say will not only be less effective, but possibly detrimental, brutal, and even destructive. Slowing the pace of speaking allows us to check our motivation, therefore be slow to speak, but not silent. Another issue in our self-centeredness and pride, we think it matters more if we directly say it rather than if it's being said by anyone else. So we better say it before time runs out. At the end of the day, there is a higher virtue of being grateful that truth is effectively being communicated, no matter who said it. Consider Paul in Philippians. When are we going to realize that the power of the legacy of our faith does not rest only on our finite voices? Third, be slow to anger. See the progression in verse 19 of human interactions in the sequence of these three commands. Now allow me to take some liberty with verse 19. By flipping it and the adjectives to make a point about human reactions toward one another. So if we are slow to listen, we will be quicker to speak. And if we are too quick to speak, we will be quicker to stimulate anger. This is the opposite, obviously, of what the text is actually saying. But it emphasizes the importance of how to pace our listening, our speech, and our anger. In all my observations of human relationships as a counselor over the last 39 years and as an educator, this is the natural human progression which leads to a messy, messy human anger that does not produce the righteousness that God desires. Realize that this space offers an opportunity, the space of slowing down our anger. It offers us an opportunity for a more humble response that is so needy today. Now, some thoughts about managing our emotional reactivity of fear and anger. The two emotions, fear and anger, are so prevalent in our society. You see it in the news every day, fear and anger. Anger and fear are related and found to be active in a less rational part of our brain. At its extreme, fear can engage the get them before they get us, the fight response. And when we and others fear and engage anger as a protection, wisdom will falter and evil will prevail. Fear can also cause us to flee from the fearful sources, the flight response, which leads to passivity or the absence of doing what is good, and evil of sorts. Current technology has revealed more about how our brain actually functions when in fearful or angry states. The part of the brain that is stimulated when anger and fear is present is called the amygdala, which is a storehouse of emotional memory and a source of survival instincts. By itself, it is not capable of rational thought. And if indulged, will cut off the neural pathways to the cortex necessary to engage in the wise way that God desires. When this part of the brain is engaged and indulged, in less than 1 second, it is capable of hijacking the rational response. Unless the emotional impulses can be guided to a region of God's creatively designed brain, rationality is not possible. A wiser management and use of our emotions is not possible. This is clearly where the pace of slowing down, the anger and fear reflex can facilitate wise response. As believers, we have something more than brain science, do we not? I think of 1 Corinthians chapter 2, 10 through 16. We have the mind of Christ. That really stimulates my neural pathways. We must manage our reactivity before it becomes counter to the good work that God has given us to do. If not, purposeless fights and quarrels will ensue. Go to James chapter 4, our text next week. Since we live in a world and a culture where managing one's emotional reactivity is not done very well, we have an opportunity to stand out with an attractive wisdom that can replace fear and anger with joy. So that's about the pace. I want to speak about the process. Essentially, it's a two-step process, according to the text, involving choice, intentionality, and practice or action, through which we can deepen our wisdom. The first step involves getting rid of moral filth and the prevailing evil. Now, James is using a picture here of taking off filthy garments. I'd like to add another metaphor, not from the text, but just from life itself in our bodies. It's called respiration, the thing we have to do to stay alive, breathing. Well, one of the steps in that is expiration, or exhaling. And I just read somewhere that, do you know that when we exhale, that we are actually getting rid of 70% of our toxins when we breathe or exhale? Now that's just a small little detail that I find fascinating, but that's also a metaphor of what we are to do in getting rid of all those toxic things that we tend to do. What is moral filth that we need to get rid of? It's anything that is contrary to, takes us away from, or mocks God's revealed truth and His righteous will for us. Idolatry. It's a big one. This includes things, thoughts, emotions, and behaviors which can soil our pure heart, cloud our clear and good conscience, and distract us from practicing our sincere faith that are necessary to love in the way that God commands. As believers, we are able to discern the holy and righteous will of God with a pure heart. We are also capable of discerning right from wrong with a clear and a good conscience. We have the intention and the capacity to act in a way that is without hypocrisy. We are to where our walk matches our talk and demonstrates a sincere faith. On the other hand, we also have this insatiable desire to survive life, as we fear its inevitable trials and difficulties, which was spoken about earlier on. This is where we can choose to clothe ourselves and hide ourselves with safety, but a type of safety that keeps us from the necessary risk to be distinctively steadfast and wise. This choice leads us to a life of mediocrity, where the absence of good or not doing the good we ought to do prevails. This sin of omission is so often chosen because the good that we're called to do may lead us into fearful places where we can choose to flee from as a way to protect ourselves. We choose safety out of the fear of suffering. One facet of evil is described, as I said before, as the absence of good. With that in mind, I believe the pursuit of safety, which is motivated by fear, is also a manifestation of evil and filth. So, I do want to say something about choosing safety here. As a wise friend recently told me, that fear invites a vain repetition. Here, obsessions and addictions increase, where we are drawn to what seems to be a reliable and consistent companion, offering a temporary comfort, but ultimately cannot really satisfy us with the good we so desperately need to fully live life. Once again, when we choose safety out of the fear of suffering, we open ourselves to return to the filth that deters us from the royal and washed robes of redemption and sanctification. However, when we get rid of what is taking up so much of our time and space, we have more room for the second step of this process. It's about taking in. So when we exhale, what happens? We empty our lungs. We leave more room to inhale, to inspire those things that we need, the oxygen that our body so desperately craves and needs to function. So letting go of what we foolishly take pride and comfort in leaves room for a humble trust in the one who has ultimate control and lovingly reveals his truth and will through his word, the implanted word. It's something we already have, but we need to accept it. It means drive it in deeper. This dynamic word is revealed in writing, demonstrated through the incarnation, and alive and active in the obedient lives of his children. That's us, brothers and sisters. This choice takes us back to numerous examples through Scripture, where God clearly lays out a choice that ultimately comes down to life or death, being a slave to sin or a slave to righteousness. The flesh or the spirit. We have that choice, do we not? It must involve humility or knowing our real position before the one and true, the holy God. It is apparent that the misuses of the pace and the presence of evil involves a level of pride. Remember I was talking about those things? Pride, our sinful nature, takes effect. And when we go to that offers an illusion of control no human ever really has or will have. Until we reckon with the holy author of the Word and life itself, who ultimately has all control for us on a journey, what we're doomed to is nothing but an inevitable death of our life here on earth. And unfortunately, too, for many people, it's after a less than wise life. That, to me, is a slow suicide. On the other hand, when we do accept what he has put in our life and foster it and wisely live by it, put it into practice, eternal life in his kingdom becomes the ultimate source of joy. The choice is ours. How do we get rid of the filthy, moral filth and evil? How do we accept? Do we have that choice before us? I'm going to conclude with something. It hit me when I was walking up here, and it'll make sense as I talk. It involves that choice. And I remember I said earlier, it involves choice and intentionality and action. I said 7 months ago, I knew that I had the opportunity to speak on these verses. And so I made the choice. Yes, I'll do it. And from that time, on a regular basis, that I mentioned before, I intentionally listen to what those verses really have to say. I presented it. But what hit me, and that's why I'm getting off my text here, is when I stood to walk up onto this podium, something happened. It says, "Are you going to do this, Jim?" And it hit me when I put my foot on that first step there. And what hit me was something called fear. I get plagued by that. Some things I'm very... Now, I know, okay, I do goofy things like spill water on myself.
But I'm pretty comfortable in a lot of situations. But preaching isn't something that comes natural to me. I'm a bit scared. Me, I didn't show that much up here, okay? But believe me, it was working. But then I turned around and I saw brothers and sisters, dear brothers and sisters. Some of you I know, some of you have had the opportunity to talk with and to listen to. I look forward to that, if the rest of my life offers me that responsibility. But there was something in that said, okay, talk, Jim, preach. And that moment was a spot. It was like what I call a sweet spot, where if I turned around and says, no, Wayne, you get up here. You preach, okay? Dean, would you come up here and preach instead? You're going to do a better job than me, right? They weren't asked to preach on this. I was. And here's what was so sweet about that. Because not only did I see the community of dear brothers and sisters, but I felt what Isaiah says in chapter 41, which is so great. And it's this: fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. That's what the choice to obey can lead us to, even though there's scary things around us. And I pray, my dear brothers and sisters, that as you watch your pace of communication, as James has told us, and as you make a choice to humbly accept the implanted word, that you too will experience the presence of the God who is with us and helps us through the most scariest of things. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak.